Hi, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed the program so far. And now for our final session, how COVID has accelerated and scaled EdTech innovation. We now have our fireside chat with Amar Kumar, moderated by Professor Farina Sultan. Professor Farina Sultan will be doing a fireside chat with Amar Kumar. Dr. Sultan is a professor at the Demore McKim School of Business at Northeastern University and has been in academia for over 3 decades. She's also a charter member of Open Boston.
Hello, I am Farina Sultan, as introduced by Fariha. Fariha, I'm not going to forgive you for this one. Look at the slide. It says Northwestern University. And I told you in the morning to make it Northeastern. In any case, I'm honored and delighted to be here today to moderate this fireside chat with Amar Kumar. Amar is from HiPod Learning, and he has a very interesting background. He is an education entrepreneur who's passionate about making learning more personal, more social, and more engaging. He is the founder, as I mentioned, of HiPod Learning, where small group learning is paired with online learning to deliver a new type of learning experience. He has a background in computer science from Purdue and an MBA from HBS. Amar has worked at McKinsey and subsequently was the chief product officer for Pearson's online K through 12 division. Amar has also been, interestingly enough, a school teacher and a principal at a high needs rural school in India. So, a very interesting, creative, and unique career path, I must say. So, as a professor in higher ed, I have experienced some of the um, impact that has happened in higher education. But now, with this push within the US to open up K through 12 schools, my first question to you is, what are some ways, significant ways, that you think this pandemic has impacted and affected K through 12 education in the US?
Thank you for that question. And thank you for having me, everyone. It's such an honor to be here with you all. I care a lot about education, and this question is a great way to start because education has really dramatically been affected by the pandemic. A lot of you must be parents in the audience who have seen their students do work at home now for the first time, and not in the black box of the school that they used to go to. And one of the things we have seen in the last year is that parents in general are surprised by the work their students are doing. Either they're not doing as much as they thought, or the rigor of the work isn't as high as they expected. I've heard stories of parents who say, my son does a 45-minute Zoom every day, and then the rest of the day, they just leave the Zoom on to sort of check a box that they did something, but there's no actual interaction with teachers or students. So parents are being surprised by the kind of work that their students are really doing in some of these schools. And so as a result of that, what we call parent agency is higher than ever before. Almost 15% of parents have pulled their kids out of public schools in the last year and taken them to private schools, charter schools, online schools, learning pods, other forms of learning that is not a traditional public school because they're unhappy with the experience they had. So that's been a big change, is public schools are struggling to keep up. Teachers, on the other hand, have done a great job of adopting online tools. They've been forced to do so. So they're teaching in new ways. They're interacting with students in different ways, which has been stressful, but I think they're sort of coping with that work. Students have shown a lot more resiliency than they've ever had to before. They've had to do this work from home under several disruptions and fear, and they've had to work with their peers and with their teachers in new ways. And then the ed tech industry, so folks who are in education technology, have really tried to capture this moment because a lot of the learning now became at home. So the consumer or the customer became the parent. The customer was the student and the parent, not some teacher or not some school district administrator. So all these new models of learning are now emerging online or through remote. There's been a massive growth in tools to help people stay connected or reach parents directly. Some of you may be familiar with a company called OutSchool, which allows you to buy courses for your K through 12 students for $20, $30 a course. And that company's seen 1,000% growth over the last year. So it's just a lot of great new models that are coming up in what is a relatively difficult period.
Yeah. Well, so much has happened as you're describing in this K through 12 environment. But I wonder, from all the different things that you have experienced, what would you say is a big aha that you experienced during the pandemic in terms of lessons learned and trends? And which of these do you think will continue in the future, even beyond the pandemic?
Yeah, I think the biggest aha and point of joy for me is that education is becoming much more of a consumer player, consumer industry than it's ever been. It's good for everyone in education to think of students and parents as consumers, not just inputs or outputs. A lot of times we look at this as a mass production system where inputs come in, we do something to that input, and then graduates come out. It's not the way learning ought to be. And so it's really good when we see our students as people and we develop empathy for them and their families. If we do that, we'll build better products, we'll build better services, and we'll get better educational outcomes. So I'm really excited about that trend, and I think it will survive after the pandemic, especially as parents look for new models.
Okay. One of the things that, at least in the US, we have really experienced is that there has been a definite impact, at least according to popular press, in terms of the racial and social inequities, and how did this affect, these students across these different segments in our society, um, and what might be the long-term effect on these different segments, in your opinion?
Yeah, such an important question. Unfortunately, the answer isn't good. The news isn't good. These inequities have been further exacerbated as a result of the pandemic. If you look at one end of the spectrum with families who are wealthy and proactive in education, they've actually done better during the pandemic than they were doing before. Private schools have stayed in session and brought a greater focus to personal learning. People have invested in having private learning pods or special tutors. They've paid for classes on OutSchool or Khan Academy. So other types of enrichment have really accelerated. I spoke to a parent last week who started the pandemic with a fifth grader who was reading at a sixth grade level. And that kid is now at an 11th grade reading level. How is that even possible that in 1 year, the student made 5 grade levels of progress in reading? It's because his family was really investing in just spending more time with him. If you look at the other end of that spectrum, families have very basic issues like device access. So they don't have laptops, or they don't have broadband or internet at home. And even if they get those things, they may not have the environment to learn consistently. So in the Globe, there was an article recently that just last week that 40% of Boston Public School high schools students are chronically absent. That means they've missed more than 10 days in a row. 40% of high school students. Think about what that does to your chances of graduation or ever going to college. There was another story of a student who was in elementary school who doesn't have a safe place to do his schoolwork because I think he's in a single parent home, and his mother drives an Uber as her source of employment. So he sits in the front seat of her Uber while she's working to try to do his online classes. And his Wi-Fi keeps dropping. It's not a good place to learn. And so that's the kind of unfortunate experience that this other end of the spectrum is having. So it's no doubt that these gaps existed before the pandemic. This is not a new gap, but it is getting wider and it is getting more and more stark. And unfortunately, learning loss like this has a lifelong effect. And it's hurting certain demographics more than others. Black, low income, Hispanic, those types of demographics are getting hurt more. And that's going to directly impact their lifelong earning potential, lifelong learning potential, And you can start to measure that now, and the effect is in the millions and millions of dollars of just these small communities. And so it's really sad to see, and unfortunately, we're not seeing much progress yet.
So the question then becomes, are there things that one can do to lessen these impacts in the future? You have recently pivoted from being chief product officer in the industry at Pearson, and then you have started focusing on a startup, iPod Learning, in the middle of a pandemic. So, what drove you to that, and what was the role of the pandemic in making you take this decision at this
Yeah.
point?
Yeah. Maybe there's a little bit of craziness to try to start a new company during a pandemic. I think in my last role, leading product for the second largest online learning company in the world, um, I think I realized something, that online learning, the promise has always been personalization and flexibility. You can do the courses wherever you are, whenever you want. You can move as fast as you want, as slow as you want. And that promise is quite incredible. But online learning also has two really big drawbacks, especially for K through 12 students. One is it's a very lonely experience. Those of you who've been on Zoom calls all day during the week, you know the feeling. You're sitting alone in a room in front of a computer and you're just churning through content. That's not how learning is maximized. That's a big drawback of online learning. And the second big drawback is the parent has to do a lot of work to make sure the student stays on task, that the student is understanding and applying that knowledge. And a lot of parents can't do that. They can't afford to do it, or they don't have the skills to do it. And so during the pandemic, 100% of the population got introduced to online learning, the benefits and the problems. And what I started to realize last year was I couldn't do anything about those problems. I could make it a beautiful interface, improve the curriculum, but I couldn't solve those two big problems. So I decided to leave and find a way to focus on solving it in a different way that then makes learning more social, more personal, more convenient, and not an assembly line of students just churning through content. So the concept of KaiPod Learning is we bring together 8 students in a pod with a dedicated learning coach who is someone who's really good at engaging students and keeping them on task. And that coach and that pod of students, they enroll in an online school, but then they do all their work in person. So we're able to take the best of online learning, so great content, great technology that's been already developed, but we deliver it in an in-person environment in small groups so that it's really supercharged in terms of personalization. And then we enrich it. So we take these kids into the community every week or every few days to do volunteer work, to apply what they're learning to local businesses and create their own small businesses, because we want learning to feel social and collaborative and difficult. So that's the concept of KaiPod Learning. And I think the pandemic has made it more possible because 1, people are used to online learning. 2, people are more comfortable with small group learning, even after the pandemic ends, hopefully soon. And more parents have decided that the traditional public school is just not working for them. So they're excited to try something new. So we're really excited about the opportunity to launch this new model this year, to see if it can help students do better than they are in a traditional classroom.
So, who is your target demographic for this, initiative that you are, embarking on or have embarked on? Who are you
Yeah.
going after? What type of family or what type of student? Obviously there is this technology, issue. Many people don't have the access to technology to do online.
Yeah.
So, what are the factors that you're taking into consideration as you launch this, and who's the target demographic that you're going after?
Yeah. My dream is that this is the right solution for every student, but I know that's not practical today. So I'd like to start with families and students who are already comfortable with online learning. So they already have experience, either just this year from the pandemic or from before. Really, this industry of online K through 12 learning started all the way back in 2001 with a company called Connections Education. And so there's a lot of people who have experience in online learning, and they have those two problems of socialization and parents having to do a lot of work to support the kids. So my initial demographic, or my target segment, is to help those families improve their experience through a KaiPod. And then I believe with that, I can then start to prove that this is a better learning model for all students. And so from there, I'd like to target families in underperforming school districts. It could be in example, urban Boston, where the schools aren't really as great as we'd like them to be. Springfield, Massachusetts. There's a lot of places where public schools haven't really excelled. And so parents don't have many choices. They can choose to leave, disrupting their life and work. They can choose to pay for private school, which is really expensive. Or I'd like to provide them a new option, which is they can join a pod where they can have this blend of online learning and offline learning in a very personalized and enriched way, which in my opinion will eventually become better than anything else available in the market. So that's kind of my segment, is start with online schoolers, expand to urban school districts where the quality just isn't great, and then use that to use as a jumping off point to reach more families across the state and across the country to say, this is a better option for us.
So what is the business model then? What is the revenue model for your, for this endeavor that you envision?
Yeah, sure. So the core idea is we build on top of public school funding. So when you sign up with our company, we help you enroll in a free public online school in your state. So in this case, Massachusetts, right? So you enroll in that school, which you can do on your own and you don't have to pay anything. And then you pay us a fee to provide a wrapper service around that online school. So we have a center, which is a learning center that you can drop your students. We have a dedicated coach, which is in an 8-to-1 ratio. We provide all the enrichment activities, field trips, guest speakers, projects. We take care of all of that. And we provide that coverage up from as early as 8 a.m. till 5:30 p.m. every day. So you don't even have to worry about after school care, and 2 people in a family can actually have jobs if they choose to. So we can do all of this for about $12,000 a year. So for you, you're getting great quality public education, technology that you need, curriculum that you need, supplies that you need, 45 hours of coverage a week, a dedicated learning coach, as well as some other services for less than private school, and in many cases, less than 3 hours of after school care at your public school district. So it comes to about $300 a week.
Okay, all right. So, so then the demographic is one obviously that can afford this kind of money. And so is there any lesson from here that one could take to those areas of, and cities like inner city Boston, et cetera, where people don't have those funds to learn in this manner, which is very Socratic and, very engaging and interactive, and obviously helpful to learning. But what can we think about ways in which we can reach those populations which have really been impacted even worse than others, because the divide, the socioeconomic is widening. So is there such a model that you can envision for those inner city, children in the K?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. In fact, that's where my heart is. You mentioned I used to teach at a school, and that was a very high needs school where the school was cross subsidized. So about half the students would subsidize through their tuition, the other half who were very low income and didn't pay anything to attend the school. And so our first plan is to do some cross subsidization of costs, as well as use support from foundations and nonprofits and donors to help more high needs students be in our pods, because we really need them to be diverse. That's the first step. The second step is, as we scale to open more pods, our overall cost of delivery obviously will go down because we can buy at scale, we can organize more pods. And then the third that we hope ultimately is we start influencing the core education sector, the public schools, to adopt some of these Socratic small group learning methodologies in traditional schools. I have no interest of destroying the public sector. I came from the public school system. I just really want to help make it better. And so my idea is, let's create some innovation outside of the sector that helps show what's possible, and then use that to influence public schools.
We have a question in the chat here from Zara Nain, asking, how can we democratize online learning and make technology tools more accessible to public school children? What do we have to do? So,
Yeah, I mean, comes down to something I said earlier. There's obviously there's the obvious things like devices and internet access. Those problems are easier to solve, and a lot of school districts have solved that problem over this past year. The second thing that's required for online learning to be effective is a place to learn. That's a constant and consistent learning environment. And a lot of homes don't have that. There may be younger siblings to take care of. There may be a lot of people moving in and out of a space, which just may not be a safe place to learn every day. And then the third thing you need is a dedicated learning, we call it a learning coach, but an adult, a caring adult who's there to help you stay on task, who's there to help you learn. And again, a lot of students don't have that. And so what ends up happening is that the school, a traditional school, plays that role. A traditional school plays a childcare role for a lot of students, provides a safe place to learn, and provides that adult. I think what we can do through KaiPod is create that for more students at a lower cost. And so we'd like to innovate and create a better learning experience. We'd like to innovate to try to do that. And so therefore we can reach more students who don't have a safe place to learn or a caring adult, because online learning is just not equitable today. And you're 100% right to point that out.
Okay. So we have talked about K through 12 so far, because that's your area of expertise. But as a higher ed professor myself, I'm wondering what are some lessons from the K through 12 arena that are also transferable to higher ed in terms of online, teaching and learning?
It's such a interesting way to ask that question, because usually in education, we ask the question the other way. What can K-12 learn from higher education? Because higher education is at least a decade ahead of K-12 in online learning, technology, and innovation. But I think the one thing I'd point out is I've seen a lot of K through 12 schools, and I'm really proud of this. I've seen them develop a deep empathy for the student as a child first, and then a learner second. And so they've really started to deeply understand that this child lacks a device or internet or a stable home environment. They just need food on a daily basis. And so school districts have expanded their role as caregivers, as food providers, as social workers. And I think that perspective can get lost in higher education because the students are seen as fully functioning adults.
Right.
And we forget to see them as humans who have needs, who have anxiety or depression or other needs. And college is so much about, I think we talked about this, college is so much about learning and socialization, interacting with peers, that when that gets disrupted, what takes its place? And I don't think enough higher education institutions have thought seriously about how their students are feeling as people, as humans, as kids in many cases. Right. So I'd like to see higher ed take a more human-centered view of education, with treating learners as people and not as inputs.
There's a question from Imran Saeed saying, don't you think the pandemic will create a backlash to online learning because everyone is sick of Zoom?
You are 100% right, Imran. There is already a backlash brewing to online learning. And one of the things that I've seen those who are in online learning try to say is, what you're seeing in the pandemic isn't online learning. It's remote teaching, it's emergency remote teaching. And so that's a distinction to draw. The company I was with for the last few years, they've been operating since 2001 in online learning. And we have a really comprehensive pedagogical approach to online learning. So we don't just throw a bunch of lessons on Zoom. There is a flipped classroom model where there's content, there's assessment, there's interactive activities, and then there's a synchronous session with the teacher, there's some asynchronous work. So it's really well designed to operate for the long run. So those of our customers who had this model during the pandemic didn't miss a beat. They were happy, they were still going. I think it's the traditional school districts who said, all right, whatever we were doing in person, we're going to now do online. We call this Zoom hell. It's just like, just put everything online. That's not really the right approach. And so I 100% agree there is a backlash. And what we have to do is try to convince parents that there is an even better version of online learning that you didn't yet experience.
Right. Another question from Zara Naeem. Can we teach younger learners to use organizational tools to replace the role of a disciplining teacher, in this online environment? Can the young ones learn better organization to use it?
Yeah, I think, and it depends on what you mean by younger learners. Certainly online learning is very effective for middle school onwards. in elementary school, it still requires a parent to be very actively involved, to, like you said, to be organized, to stay on task. And we haven't found a good way to teach that yet. And I think the problem is, it's not a problem, it's a good thing to try to solve. And what we need to do is help these students develop self-regulation skills, motivation skills. Typically we teach those in college, right? So you're going to bring them down when you get into online learning. So it's a tough thing, but it still requires a parent. You're not going to replace that role.
Sure. Kevan Haja is asking, will one coach be effective as a teaching assistant for all subjects, or are you envisioning that for different subjects you have different coaches, etc.?
Yeah, sure. You're talking about the KaiPod model. A great question.
Yes.
So the idea for the coach is not really a teaching assistant in the same way they might be in college. It's more of a guide or a counselor that's there with you to help you stay on task. And so your teacher, your official teacher, is part of the online school. So you interact with that teacher online, and that teacher is dedicated for a subject. And you'll have 6 to 8 of those teachers based on the subjects you're in. And that coach is just there to make sure you're actually doing the work. And when it seems like you're struggling with something, that coach will either work with you if they have the expertise, or they'll talk to the teacher about how to make sure that you are going to be staying on track. The other plan we have is to have 2 pods be located in the same location. Have one of the pod coaches be a little bit more of an expert in science and math, and the other pod coach be more of an expert in English and creativity and those types of skills. And then have them swap every few days so that students are getting full exposure to all types of skills. So we're going to pilot that this year to see if that works better.
So is that with middle school students?
Yeah, still with middle school. Yep.
And in Boston? Are you planning to do this in Boston?
Yep, that's right. That's right.
So how do you think the pandemic affects this launch of your startup? And
I'm only looking at it as a positive. I think that more parents are open to more things. Given some positive news around vaccines and lower spread, I think parents will be open to a pod concept. So 8 families that have all agreed to COVID precautions, kind of going through this model together. So I think it'll be fine. There's obviously a risk that there's another flare up when we get to the winter and parents don't want to do this. But the good part about our model is we are already partly online. So if we do need to go fully online because something has to shut down, our core instruction will not stop. The thing that stops is more those enrichment activities, which, for short periods of time, we can survive.
So is this a replacement for public school teaching?
It's an add-on to public school. So you don't anymore go into a public school building. You come to our learning center and you're doing your online learning at an online public school. And then the tutor that's on site is doing your enrichment activities.
I see. Okay, I think we have had quite a few, interesting questions here, and so we are all learning as we go through this COVID. And I think one of the things that pointed out that really resonates even with a higher ed student is this notion of the student-centered learning, and the fact that more so in the pandemic than before, this sense of isolation and for students, at least that I see, is immense, and issues of mental health, etc., are much more prevalent than they have been in the past. And we don't know, these students are not getting vaccinated anytime soon, but maybe when they have the 18 plus, at least the ones at the university level. And as we saw, we haven't started talking about vaccination for K through 12. It is heartening to hear that the teachers in the K through 12 will be pushed up front so that they can be in a safer enough environment to teach, whether it is in the public school or the private school or even in this pod model of yours. One would hope that your teachers are also vaccinated so that
That's
they
right.
are safe. So I think I would like to thank you for this very interesting fireside chat, albeit without the fireside. You have nice greenery in the back, and I have Northeastern in the back. So, and we've taken some interesting questions. So I'd like to give it back to Faria to do a wrap up of our day today. Thank you very much, Amar, for coming and speaking. So, Ambreen, are you taking over?
Yeah, I'm going to do the closing remarks.
Okay.
But thank you so much for doing the fireside chat. Thank you so much, Amar. We learned so much from you with respect to the changes in EdTech education that I think we're already heading towards a more virtual world before COVID, and we've just accelerated that with COVID. Thank you so much, Professor Sultan, for facilitating this discussion. We could have gone on for a couple more hours, but I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who made this possible. I want to thank the executive team, especially Sidra Baloch, Abdul Karim Mehman, Zara Naeem, and many others who of course are speakers. So this wouldn't have been possible without our speakers, of course. Want to encourage more people to join Open Boston. Take this opportunity to visit our website, follow us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on Twitter. We also have an Instagram account, thanks to Farhan. So thank you. I forgot to bring up Farhan. He's our newest volunteer and member of our executive team. So please stay in touch with us as we create more events like this. We hope you enjoyed this session. And as I said, we're looking for volunteers, we're looking for members, we're looking for leaders, we're looking for your ideas. So Abdul Karim will be sending out, AK will be sending out a survey to everyone. So I hope you'll complete the survey. Let us know how this event was. Let us know if you have any other future ideas. Our website is open-boston.org. And also want to make a pitch for our next event, which is going to be related to the ease of doing business in Pakistan. We'll be doing that in partnership with the Pakistan Council of New York. So stay tuned. That will be taking place in April. Wanted to also wish everyone a happy Women's History Month. This is March. And this is Women's History Month, and you heard from many women who are game changers, from Dr. Sultan, our professor at Northeastern, to Dr. Nahid Bedelia, who's served from West Africa to Central Africa to the US, and to Dr. Fawzia Khan, who is making waves with artificial intelligence in healthcare. And thanks again, Amar. We'll be keeping an eye out on your social enterprise, your startup. We wish you all of you the greatest success in the coming year and beyond. So with that, I think I'll end this session. Thank you, everyone, for making this possible. Take care and have a great weekend.